Hello, this is David welcoming you to another episode of D&D History Hub, where we take a journey into the past. Today we're going back to September 1885, and a young Jewish woman named Rosa Frankenstein boards a ship that will take her on the long and perilous journey from her London home to Sydney, Australia, where she was to be married to her fiancé. Rosa would have been both anxious and excited as she embarked on the month-long voyage to the other side of the world. It was about as far as you could go, and in those days it really was a dangerous journey on the high seas. Not only was she leaving her family and friends, but also the familiar haunts of hustling, bustling, smog-choked London. It had been her only home for the past 23 years. Now, Rosa knew little about Sydney and not much more about Australia. And she knew even less about the man to whom she would be married. So, who was Rosa Frankenstein? The family name is German Jewish Ashkenazi, and in the 19th century it was common in several parts of Northern Europe. It's not possible to be certain, but records indicate that a couple who may have been Rosa's parents, David and Amelia, were born in Breslau in Silesia, and at some point they migrated to London. But by 1881, David was a widower, and he worked as a salesman, or possibly some kind of merchant dealing in coffee. Indications are that Rosa was born in 1861, making her 23 when she embarked on her journey to the other side of the world. At this time, Rosa and family may have lived in the London suburb of Hackney, then home to around 5,000 Jews, with the total Jewish population of London around 47,000 persons in 1883. Rosa, we imagine, would have felt part of a vibrant community. It's unlikely that loneliness and isolation would ever have been a problem. As L.Q. Roselia points out in a doctoral thesis, many Jewish parents felt their daughters had limited options for becoming married in London, and there was a perception that it was easier for women to find suitable marriage partners in Australia. Rosa's fiancé, who went by the glamorous names of Jules Francois Archibald, was a passionate campaigning journalist for the Sydney-based newspaper, the Bulletin, and he had been in London for a couple of years on assignment. His name, he would explain to anybody who cared to listen, had been bestowed on him by his mother, a French Jew, he said, and his birthplace was France. So Rosa and Jules met sometime in 1884, and on March the 4th, 1885, Archibald returned to his Sydney home to be editor of the Bulletin and to make preparations for his marriage to Rosa. Now, Rosa followed several weeks later, and the marriage took place that November. But there was to be no happy ever after for Rosa, only shattered dreams and a broken heart. For Jules Francois was not the man he had made himself out to be. Despite what he had told Rosa and any other credulous listeners, Archibald was not born in France, but rather somewhere near Geelong in Victoria in 1856. He wasn't called Jules Francois. His real given names were John Feltham. He rose to fame eventually as the editor of the radically Republican Bulletin newspaper and as a successful promoter of Australian artistic and literary giants such as Norman Lindsay, Henry Lawson, and Banjo Patterson. His name actually lives on today in the annual eponymous Archibald Prize for Portraiture and the Archibald Memorial Fountain in Sydney's Hyde Park. Archibald's father was a police sergeant originally from Ireland, and his mother, Charlotte Jane, was a local whose family name was Madden, and she was neither French nor a Jew, and she died actually when Archibald was aged just 4 years old. So after attending local schools and desiring to make a career in journalism, Archibald moved to Melbourne in search of new opportunities. Now, it was here, it seems, that he became besotted with France and the French after boarding with a Breton couple who impressed and influenced him. He became a devotee of French art, literature, and philosophy. It's not clear what induced him to adopt the Jewish identity, but it could all have been part of his glamour-seeking pursuit. Now, in 1880, Archibald co-founded the Bulletin in Sydney before heading to London for that assignment in 1883. Now, we don't know how Rosa and Archibald met, but there is actually a story that Rosa nursed him through an illness, after which it seems he proposed to her. Rosa accepted, and they became engaged. So why did Rosa accept Archibald's marriage proposal? The simple answer might be that they were two young people who were attracted to one another. Jules was intelligent, witty, and if not a good listener, a thoroughly first-class talker. Plus he had a prestigious job and good prospects. Further, her family may have encouraged her to take this opportunity for economic security and prosperity with the kind of man you didn't find in London's East End in those days. Something more the Artful Dodger. And according to Jules Francois, what might have been the clincher is that he had a French-Jewish heritage. His mother was a Jew, he said, and French. And it was this Jewish heritage which for Rosa and her family could only mean one thing, that Archibald himself was a Jew. For under halakha, that is Jewish law, Judaism is matrilineal. Therefore, Jules Francois was Jewish too, if his mother was a Jew. Rosa may well have thought she was being wooed by a fellow Jew. So it would have been a very surprised Rosa then who found herself getting married to a Goy in Sydney Presbyterian Church on November 22nd, 1885. Their wedding certificate, incidentally, gives Archibald's birthplace as France. Now married and thousands of miles from London, there was little, if anything, that Rosa could do to escape. She couldn't go home. She couldn't seek refuge elsewhere. She had no family or close friends who could help her out. For better or worse, she was stuck with this man, calling himself Jules Francois. Now, the marriage deteriorated over time. They did have one child, but tragically, the child died whilst a very young infant. For a woman, divorce in those days was very expensive and difficult to obtain. Rosa was thousands of miles from home with no money of her own. And like many in her situation, she took to drink to ease the pain. Marriage continued, with the two rarely speaking until her death in 1911. Archibald found refuge in daily life at the Bulletin, becoming a 14 hours a day workaholic, ridden with a growing cluster of psychological problems that saw him detained in mental hospital for quite long periods of time. A feature article lauding Archibald's achievements, published in the Sunday Herald in November 1942, long after his death in 1919, ended by asserting that he had lived his life as a bachelor and that Sydney was his one and only love. As he aged, as I said, Archibald did suffer from anxiety, depression and mania, and he became physically frail and restless, dying in 1919, but he exited the world the way he came into it, and that was as a Catholic, and he is buried in the Catholic section of Waverley Cemetery in Sydney. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. See you next time. Goodbye.